You are listening to The Darker Sides of Life, a podcast by Hexekami. Hello and welcome to the 9th episode of The Darker Sides of Life. I'm your host Camilla, but you may know me better under my Instagram handle, which is hexekami. Today's episode is about feeling out of place. Out of place in specific situations, out of place in life, out of place in ourselves. This episode will probably in many ways tie itself together with other episodes, like the one about losing myself and the one about yearning, but I'm doing it still because I do believe that things can and should be seen from different angles in order for us to understand them better. So that is what I will try to do today when I'm talking about feeling out of place. I think to me, feeling out of place is very much like feeling like one doesn't belong. Now, I mentioned in my episode about friendships that I for years have struggled with this since I find it very difficult to make friends in the long run. I'm very good at meeting new people, but I tend to act like the people around me instead of acting like me. This can be because I'm a highly sensitive person and it's in my blood, so to speak, to shift so I match others' mood, and if not switch, then definitely copy what others are feeling, because I will literally feel those emotions too, even if I'm not involved in the issue behind the various feelings others may have. Now, I know I just said this can be because I'm a highly sensitive person, but I also believe it stems from my childhood trauma. If you know anything about childhood trauma, then you know that having been abused early in life will leave lifelong lasting effects on you, such as a hypersensitivity towards situations with other people, because you are, basically, always alert to what may happen in a bad kind of way, so you ultimately can flee the scene. No matter the reason, this feeling of adapting to the other people around you and their behavior ties in with feeling out of place, doesn't it? I think it does. I remember from my teenage years how I would struggle with this. I was constantly getting the feeling that something wasn't right, that one thing was not like the other, and that one thing was me. I think a lot of it stemmed from the death of my mum, as I've also mentioned before, but I also think that it is deeper than that, if anything can be deeper than death. Let me try to explain what I mean. I think death is something external that can happen to us. Of course, it will eventually on a rather intimate level happen to us all, since we are mortal, but I mean that it can happen to us at random if someone close to us dies. Death will shape us. It's maybe even shaping you as you are listening to this. And the experience of death will forever change us. There will be a before and an after. No doubt about it. And I think that this experience in itself can make us feel like we don't belong amongst our peers, because suddenly we have this direct knowledge that life is fragile and death is real, and that is something that the majority isn't really dealing with on an everyday basis, because honestly, that would make us all go mad. So in that sense, if one has experienced death as something that has happened to a loved one, then that can in itself bring feelings of not belonging anymore. But, and this is the important but here, I think many times people will eventually sort of return to a more normal state of mind. Death will always be there. The grief, the mourning, the pain, the everything of this experience will never leave. But one will adapt to it and in many ways return to a point where death is not a constant in one's life, in the sense that the feeling of not belonging fades and eventually disappears. And then there's the other aspect to this that will make the feeling of not belonging a more permanent one. And that is, to me, equally both internal and external. Now, you may be thinking that I'm going on a rant that doesn't make sense, so bear with me. I swear it will be clear in a minute. The internal/external thing I'm talking about is how the action of death is dealt with by one's close group of people, whether that be family, friends, etc. In my case, the death of my mum was handled so utterly poorly it's almost a joke. And if it wasn't so tragic, I would laugh out of pure anger, because when I look back on how my surroundings handled her death, I can't even begin to describe how messed up it was. My father, for one, burned all my mother's things in the days after her death. Yes, you heard that right. He burned them. And this is just one example of the complete lack of empathy he has, but it goes to show that the external handling of the death becomes an internal thing because, and now I swear I'm getting to my point, the way we comprehend, understand, react, and act to serious matters such as death is vastly shaped by how we handle it within our social group, I really do think that. Look at it this way. We, humans, are social animals. Like lions, let's say. We thrive in the group of our relatives, our friends, our family. We have built up our societies globally around the idea of living in numbers, in groups. We grow up within a family structure of parents and perhaps siblings. We attend schools and join classes with other people who we are then divided into smaller groups with. We at one point find a partner and make a new family group with them by having kids or pets or a collection of online friends and games or whatever. But we are all focused on it, the social aspect of being human. So if that is what we are in our core, a social animal, then imagine what it will do to us if this very social group we are confined in is acting in what seems to be the opposite ways of what is healthy. My father is the example here. He burned my mother's things. He refused to talk about her. He would mock me if I cried and yell that I was not allowed to cry and that if I did, he would ground me. He took down the painting she had done, redecorated her office space and tore down a wall in it so it didn't look like the room she had been in. There were no pictures of her besides some in his office for some reason. No real mention, no nothing. And when my grandfather years later died, the father of my father, my father, had the audacity to say to me, with tears in his eyes, that it was so hard losing a parent. I remember we sat in the car, and I was really heavily debating whether to laugh or just let it go. I eventually comforted him, saying that I understand that he's suffering, that it must be very hard to lose one's father, and he didn't even realise the absurdity of this situation, because that's just how he is. I think my feeling of not belonging stems from my father's lack of humanity, because to me, the death of my mum was only the beginning and catalyst for what was to come. One cannot learn to belong and feel safe amongst others when one is constantly living in fear, which is what I did. And therefore, I believe that the way we handle the random acts of death that happen to us as a group is so fundamental for how we eventually heal from them in a way that allows us to return to the feeling of belonging within ourselves and our peers. Now, is the feeling of belonging and lack thereof also something in me that has been present for so many years since my father is the way he is? Of course. Was he like this before she died? Yes. So I cannot blame it all on how we handle death, but I have noticed how other people who lost a parent at a young age like myself have had vastly different experiences around the event if they have had a loving parent and family who try to take care of each other and heal as a group. So how does the feeling of feeling out of place affect me now, and what have I done to help myself in this regard? Well, you see, the answer here is therapy, and lots of it. I think therapy is still taboo to many. Recently, I read the book called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Laurie Gottlieb, and in it, Laurie mentions how some of her clients lie to their partners, their families, their friends when it comes to therapy. They keep it a secret. Why? Because, as Laurie puts it, going to therapy is stigmatized to many and seen as something one only goes to if there's something wrong with you. I find this way of thinking so interesting, as if something is wrong with you. If this is truly the case, and I think it is to a lot of people, then that proves my point of the taboo in talking about the darker sides of life, which is exactly the reason for why I decided to do this podcast in the first place. We should not feel ashamed to say if and when we are dealing with things. We should not be looked down upon if we say we are seeking professional help. Rather, the opposite. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we would salute each other for going to therapy? I think that shift would be really beneficial to many, and I believe it would lift the general mental health and make it better for many. I have gone to therapy on and off since I was 8 and my mum died, and I am not ashamed to say it. But I do remember that even in school within my own class, it was something the other kids would totally ignore because it was too foreign, too odd. They didn't have the vocabulary for dealing with a situation like that, which in itself is something I hope to see will change, since so many children deal with death and loss, and they shouldn't feel more out of place than they already are. I want to mention here that I by no means blame anyone I've encountered in my life for any of the things I mention here in this episode. They are not at fault. We, as a society, are. We should improve the way we talk about mental health overall so we can help each other and ourselves. Just want to put that out there. But how can therapy help with feeling out of place? To me, it gave me a narrative for my life that I was not capable of seeing on my own. I think in my situation, the feeling of being misplaced in life comes from my father, as I mentioned, and so I needed a corrective to the narration he had given me since early childhood, which said that I was basically not good enough, not strong enough, and that if I strayed from the super narrow path he wanted me to be on, repercussions would happen, and they would happen fast and fall hard on me. So the therapy I did was focused on untangling myself from this narrative in order for me to change my story and rewrite situations that have led me to believe I'm always the odd one out. For example, I have always believed that the right thing to do in life is get an education, get a prestigious job afterwards, work yourself to death, almost, because this makes you rich, and money gets you freedom. Because this is what my father did. This is what he taught me. So imagine how odd it is to realize through all my soul searching that to me, life is not about work. It is not about money. It's not about being seen as a prestigious person who does all these things that other people around me don't because they aren't on my level. No, I am indeed not like my father. I work as little as possible to enjoy my life. I work with things I enjoy, and if they don't bring me joy, I find other work. I have asked myself what it is I want from life. I have asked myself what it is I want from life. Before, I believed it was the things I mentioned that my father did. It was to copy him and to act like it was expected of me. I thought I needed to have a big house, children, go on vacations to other countries every year, have a big car to be happy. But I don't. I don't want a big house. I don't want children. I don't need to go on vacations to other countries every year. I just need myself, my inner voice that will guide me, and my husband to enjoy the days of my life with. This sounds like a self-care book that is filled with quotes that are overused. I know. But darn, it is the truth for me. And it has taken me so many years to realize this. I still struggle with it, of course. Some days I wake up with a feeling of panic because my upbringing knocks on some door in my brain telling me that I am not doing the right thing. Where is the house? The money? What am I doing? And those days are okay to have. One cannot change everything overnight, but I have realized that by searching for myself and changing my narrative to a true one to me is slowly diminishing my feeling of being misplaced everywhere I go. Now, if I go out and the people around me seek different paths than I do, I listen and enjoy their happiness with them, but I know that this path is not for me, and I practice every time getting better and better at being honest if I'm asked questions like, so when are you having kids? Or, how come you still don't have a full-time job? Do you need my help getting one? I want to end this episode by summarizing my point. If you are feeling misplaced in life, I think there is a fairly good chance it's because you are not following your own intuition and your own happiness. If that's the case for you, and you wish to change paths, then I suggest seeking therapy and help from a professional. We cannot expect to help ourselves on such a deep level without the guidance of someone else that is a neutral person who just wants to help us. And so I think therapy is a good friend if you struggle with the feelings I have described I have felt. Next, I want to say that if you are already aware of what is your truth, I hope you can dip your toes into that. I know it's extremely overwhelming and that it feels dangerous, but it is a good way of testing out if it is indeed a path you want to try treading, or if it's just a sign you're not currently on the right one. No matter where you are in life, I want you to know that you are not alone in the darker sides of life. I promise you, so many people around you are there with you, but we're all brought up to be silent about it, which is why it feels so lonely. If you need someone to talk to, then my DMs are open. You can also reach me on the Ko-fi page to this podcast, where you can donate some money as well, so I can continue doing this audio work. If you do that, I want to thank you in advance. Remember, you are never alone, and until next time, take care. If you like this episode, I'd very much appreciate it if you would take a moment to share it with your friends, and also please leave a review and rating on iTunes. It helps me reach more people, and the only thing I want is to reach those who need someone to tell them they're not alone in the darker sides of life. Thank you for helping me and this podcast get out there. I have also set up a Ko-fi, so if you want to donate a few dollars to the podcast, there's a link for it in the description to this episode. You've been listening to The Darker Sides of Life, a podcast by Hexekami.